everyone. I am Debra Pascali-Bonaro from Orgasmic Birth and Pain to Power with Pleasure. But many of you know me, and many of you know Amy, but I am really honored today to be talking with Dr. Amy Gilliland. And she's one of the first DONA International Birth Doula trainers along with me. So it's kind of, we're giving it away, but we've been friends and colleagues for over 30 years, which makes it super special today for me to be having this dialogue with you. Amy's a research fellow at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, an adult sexuality educator, an infant mental health expert with specialized training in attachment, and her work has been published in multiple peer-reviewed journals. And Amy, I cite your work. Anybody that's ever done a doula workshop with me knows your name for sure. You are a thought leader and a visionary on birth doula issues through your blog, again, that I think everyone needs to check out if you're not already subscribing, Doula-ing the Doula, and your new book, The Heart of the Doula, Essential for Practice and Life, and I see it right behind you there. Another really essential book for all doulas and those thinking about becoming doulas and midwives and others to read. So Amy, truly a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. It really is. It's I'm thrilled, you know, because we've chatted over the years when we'll see each other at a conference or we call each other on the phone and stuff. And so we know that we're on the same page, but you guys are really lucky because you get to listen in on a whole conversation that the two of us are going to have on this topic. And we come at it from similar directions, but you have a lot more hands-on experience, and you've been to how many births now? You're up to like 1,000 or something like that?
Yeah, well, no, I'm actually only a little over 500.
Okay, well, only a little over 500. So in many different countries as well. So you have this wider variety experience, and I have read all of this research, thousands and thousands of papers, and have tried to distill what we've learned there and bring that to my doula work and my doula training and my human sexuality courses, because I'm ASEX certified. And so I still work a lot with marriage and family therapists, helping them to understand birth, which is almost invisible in the birth world. Nobody knows what I'm doing over there, or that I'm actually an expert in pornography and relationships, how pornography affects relationships. And so I mean, I have this kind of stuff that we don't talk about in the birth world very much, but that definitely influences the conversation that we're going to have today about pleasure and what is a sexy birth, you know, and what matters, what really matters. And I do a lot of workshops for nurses. I just did some on working with the laboring brain, which also dovetails with what we're going to talk about today. And I am astounded at how little most obstetrical nurses really know about physiologic birth or about how to work with spontaneous labor, because they've always had Pitocin. I mean, Pitocin was invented in the mid-50s. And because we had Pitocin, there was never a reason for obstetrics as a field, whether you're a nurse or a physician, to respect spontaneous oxytocin. They just always had pit. And so it didn't matter if the labor fell apart, because you could just pit her. And for years, the myth was, because you and I went to births for over a decade, where our clients were always told, oh, it doesn't matter if you get Pitocin, it's just the same. It's not any more painful. And the first time I heard a nurse and a physician tell a patient of theirs, yes, Pitocin labors are more painful, I had to sit down. I think that was in 2002. They were finally being honest with people. But this influence of Pitocin, and we tend to think of it as a population really benignly too. And I think that when we're talking about sexy birth, what we're talking about is we're talking about oxytocin flow. Yes. Because that is what's necessary for sexual arousal. It's necessary for labor. And oxytocin is the hormone of pleasure and safety.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I want you guys to bring those two things together, that we're talking about pleasure and we're talking about safety. And pleasure only happens within a feeling of safety. So when you feel vulnerable and you feel safe And then you have the interaction that says, hey, I want to feel pleasure now. I want to feel good. Like, even if you're just laughing at a joke that a friend makes, you know, that feeling, you know, you feel like I can safely laugh at this joke. I can safely laugh in this place where, you know, in Starbucks or wherever you happen to be. And that is, I'm vulnerable, I feel safe, and I feel pleasure, and I can let go in that experience. And there are parallels with that all throughout life.
Yes. And that leads so well. And I really love, Amy, how you talked about kind of historically, because we've been in this place for quite some time where we haven't thought about the physiology, and even longer than that, where we've separated the sexuality out of birth. And as we're bringing the physiology back in and understanding it, we're realizing how much it's tied to our sexuality. So one of our first kind of questions for you is, how can we create comfortable space for sexuality in birth in any setting? And we want to include that for many people, safety is in the hospital, whether it's safety, physically safe, and this is where my space feels safe, or because of risk situations that the safest place for them and their baby is the hospital. So what are some of your tips for creating that safe space and including sexuality?
Well, first thing I want to do is I want to mention the people who it sounds odd, but there's a couple people who I interviewed over the years, parents who said, well, they were women. They identified as female, as women and mothers. Those are the terms that they identified with. And they said to me, I didn't want to feel sexual during my birth. I wanted to feel cared for, and I wanted to feel loved. And that's what made me feel safe and able to open up and be vulnerable. And I wanted my husband there because this was a part of our lives together, but that sexual vibe was not how I wanted to feel during my labor. And so that's the place I want to start with, is this feeling of like, you should be one with your body and where you feel safety within vulnerability, or being able to feel vulnerable within a feeling of safety. And that takes work. I mean, if you're at home, you have to prepare for the level of responsibility that you're taking. So for your child's welfare, and setting that up with a great birth team, with a midwife or a physician, because some physicians do home births where I live, and making sure that they're comfortable with spontaneous labor, with you letting go, and that you have a doula or someone else to serve in that emotional support role. Because if something should go hinky, the midwife or the physician and their assistant are taking care of you and your baby medically. So, and you need somebody there to give you that reassurance and to be present with you emotionally in that moment. I mean, it's yeah, mostly midwives can't do that when things get hinky, what I call, or things get difficult. So the first element is your birth team. So it's bringing people with you who help you to feel safe, because if you're in a hospital environment, it's much more unpredictable. In a birth center, you will have been there several times. You'll have toured it. You will have gone there for your prenatal visits, hopefully. And so when you get there, your brain goes, oh, I've been here before. Oh, I know what to do. I know where the countertops are. I know where the bathroom is. I know what this smells like, because the brain operates in the limbic system during labor, the same place it does during sexuality. And so part of the process of going from early labor into active labor is letting go of that whole cerebral cortex and all of its concerns and the questions it wants answered and its ability to problem solve. And you just got to say, you know, and just let that go and make a decision to engage with the labor and to go deeper into the limbic system of your brain, which is sensory, which is uses imagery, which likes metaphor. Oftentimes people will describe their sensations in ways that create pictures in other people's brains. So that's what I mean by using imagery. Like it's like a knife inside my vagina. That would be a more negative one, but we all go, oh yeah, you know, and if you're kind of moving around in your seat right now, then you got it. You're very receptive at the moment. Your mirror neurons are turned on as I'm speaking. But some people will say, oh, that contraction just felt like a huge hug. Once I got in the tub, I just felt like I was being hugged and held. And so you, once again, the support person goes, oh, okay, now I know how you're feeling. So when people are laboring, they often will use those kinds of descriptors. So that's letting go. And so having people, so birth team, having people around you that you can allow yourself to be with your body and let go and know that they're going to create that space around you no matter where you are. And that should also include your hospital nurse if you're in the hospital. So having someone there on your birth team who knows you well and can help to make those social connections with the nurse and invite the nurse in and say, here's what you need to know about me today. Here's how we want you to help. Because here's the other thing, is we want to involve nurses as much as possible. They need to be a part of that oxytocin support circle as much, because if they're who you're relying on to communicate to the physician, who doesn't show up very often, and the nurse is also who you're going to be relying on if things get difficult. So that relationship is really critical. So your support people should be including your nurse, and your nurse doesn't have a lot of time to be in your room, maybe only 15 minutes out of every hour. And then they're either watching remotely or they're leaving you alone because things are fine and they know that people will call on the call button if anything's needed. So I would say that support team who can protect that space around you and include the medical people in a way where we're using them as an asset and they feel included and not left out, because it's the human stuff that really matters with birth. The basic human stuff is, do you feel respected as a nurse? Do you feel regarded? Do you feel included? So I want to emphasize that, and as well as if there's a midwife on call who you haven't met. Midwives are usually real good about just stepping into that circle. But so the first thing I would say is the birth team who can protect the space and connect you with people.
Fantastic. And you know, just jumping in, you're such an expert on doulas, and although probably many people here really know what a doula is, not everyone. Can you kind of define a doula and how her role fits in this?
Sure. Doulas offer emotional support, physical support, which includes comfort measures for labor, positioning, and also housekeeping. So they fetch, they're good gophers, they fetch stuff for you, they clean up the room. If I'm with a couple, if I'm with two people and they're really very engrossed in the labor support, so the partner is very engrossed in the labor support with the supportive parent and the gestational parent are very involved with one another, then I'm doing all the stuff outside to make sure that they can do what they need to do. Most often, if it's a male partner who's doing labor support, they need to take breaks. And they need to take because their brains become stressed. And for male bodies, people in male bodies, their stress hormones, in order to emotionally regulate and get over that, they need a break. So men need to take breaks. It's important for them to get that kind of, otherwise they can build up a level of stress that can turn into distress. So you asked me about doulas, and here I'm talking about male partners. But anyway, if the partner is female, when she gets stressed, if she's biologically female and has been raised in female gender culture, because that's where we have research, so that's where I can reliably say this, that their bodies also release oxytocin. So as a doula, if you are female, when you get stressed in a birth, you become more doula-like, because your body releases oxytocin, which stimulates caring behaviors. How are you doing with that? You know, what's going on? Let me help you more. So doulas offer, I mentioned emotional support. They offer physical support. They also offer information. And that information is, as they get to know you, they know what your concerns are. They know what you're afraid of. They know what language you like to use. So in giving information, they're able to package it in a way that clients can receive it. So it saves them time, saves them a lot of effort, gives them a lot of reassurance that they're learning what they need to learn in order to prepare for their own individual experience. One of our colleagues, Ann Grauer, uses she says doulas make pie. So in English, that would be like pie. You could think of like a fruit pie. If you speak Spanish, you can think of it as a foot. So I've used that I made a metaphor out of that for my primarily Spanish-speaking doula trainees. So, but practical, informational, emotional. And medical people are not interested in that. They're not interested in helping you figure out how you're going to get to your appointment. They're not interested in how you're going to arrange your childcare. That's practical type of stuff where we do a lot of problem solving with people. They're not really interested in giving you emotional support. Say you start spotting, you're afraid of having a miscarriage. Well, they're like, well, if you have this sign or that sign, then come into the hospital. But they're not there to talk you through how difficult this is and your fears are. That's what a doula would do, okay? So we tend to do problem solving, all the stuff that people think that the medical system should be doing. But medicine is about treatment and diagnosis. It's not about the support piece. You don't find that support piece anywhere in medicine. That's not been my experience. And I've done medical advocacy for people for a dozen years across the board, from all kinds of medical conditions. So I don't find that nurturing piece very often at all built into a system, unless you have a chronic disorder. And then they have a whole treatment pathway that includes courses and stuff like that. So as far as doulas, I think that doulas can also morph around what people need. I have one person, one doula in the Chicago area, who she meets with people prenatally, and then they don't want her there at the birth, so she's just available by text. So she offers a virtual doula service during the labor, so because that's what the people in Chicago wanted. So a doula is often flexible and can morph services around what people need. And I think that we have a real bias, and I think this comes back to sexy birth too, and we're talking about male partners. Do you want to broach that subject now? Should we talk about that?
No.
Sure. Okay.
Go ahead.
Is that we give men a lot of pressure to do what a doula would do with only 10% of the training. So that partners will go to a childbirth class, usually with their pregnant partner. And so the focus is on their particular labor and birth. And maybe they pick up on the comfort measures and the positioning, maybe they don't. Maybe their emotional needs as a partner, I'm freaked out about this, how am I going to deal with seeing this person in pain? The number one thing men say is that the hardest part is watching my partner in pain, even though I know that is my partner's desire, that they're finding this gratifying and a good experience. I can't deal with it because I want to fix it. And so their stress level ramps up. And and we tell men that they don't matter. Their experiences of becoming a father doesn't matter because their partner is in labor. That it's okay to have questions, but the nurse may or may not answer them. And the midwife may or may not be supportive and involving of the partner. And so partners will sometimes say, well, I felt like rather than being treated like a laboring couple, we were treated like a laboring person with a partner present, which is a very different way than being treated as this is happening to two of us. And this is something that, as I read the research literature, that a lot of medical systems are trying to grapple with. Well, we're really only interested in the process of getting the baby out. We're not interested in the social process of what is it like to become a parent. Right. So, and this shows up sexually later on. Men have a lot more difficulty resolving what they saw at the birth than we think. At least 5% of men have post-traumatic stress disorder from watching the birth, and that's a conservative.
Misschien zegt ze iets anders.
What?
Some people are unmuted, so I'm gonna try to mute people. So, sorry, Amy.
Oh, that's okay.
So yeah, let's talk about, bring it back to the sexuality. I think it's really important.
So we're talking about that men viewing birth don't see that as a sexual experience. I think that some of the births that you have been to with midwives at home, that's much more inclusive. But I think when men are in a hospital, that the social role that they feel they have to fulfill, which is often as a protector as well as a partner, and that's what my research shows, is that men often want to be in that protector role, that goes against being in a sexual space, unless they're at home or in a birth center where I think that is encouraged, and they're not going to have to do a lot of advocacy. If you're going to have to do a lot of advocacy for a birth plan, that's a cerebral cortex activity. That's not a limbic system activity.
Right.
So if that's what the partner is doing, it doesn't make for a sexual together experience for them. So that's a part of having a birth team. I think if we bring it back to setting up for a sexy birth in the hospital, the other part is being willing to work with your body and feeling good about being vulnerable. And that I can be vulnerable in the space of safety. And a lot of us as women don't have that experience in our history about being vulnerable physically in a sense of safety. I'm going to be okay if I just let go and be present with this experience and just allow it to take over and allow it to happen to me. And so that's scary, you know, say, oh, that's what's required. Yep, that's what's required. That is exactly what's required for a sexy birth, is being able to let go and be vulnerable in safety and allow your body to do what you need it to do. And I think what makes it really sexy is that sense of confidence. So is that when you have that sense of confidence in your own body and its power and belief that it's going to do what it needs to do in the way that it needs to happen. And I'm going to set that up as optimally as possible with the people I have around me, that I've chosen a place where I feel safe and confident, that I've chosen care providers, the best possible match that I can have. All right. Because sometimes you don't have control over that. You don't have control over where you're giving birth. If you're on Medicaid, you're limited with your providers and things like that. And I think that most often when I've been hired as a doula, it's because of those limitations, that people are making compromises. I can't get the ideal situation that I want. So how can I optimize the possibility of having an experience like that? And then that's where I think doulas really come into play with helping that occur. I really do, because we know how to protect the space. We know how to work with the laboring brain. We want that spontaneous oxytocin to flow. So all along the way, from traveling from the house to arriving at the hospital, to having to deal with the strangers, to having to have the cervical exam and the fetal monitor strip and all those things cancel out oxytocin and bring on catecholamines or stress hormones. So as a doula, all the way along, I'm trying to protect that oxytocin bubble. So because you have to go through those rituals in order to be checked into the hospital and stuff. So that's what we're doing, is we're really working with the body, even though moving the body during labor is not what the body and the brain wants to do. But in the system we have set up now, that's what most people are doing because they feel safer in the hospital. And it's a perceived sense of safety. It's not an objective sense of safety, like statistically objective. It's like, what do me as an individual laboring, birthing person, so wanting to be present with my body and involved and invested and in alignment with all of these wonderful hormones of prolactin and vasopressin and oxytocin, and endorphins. Those are the sexy hormones. Those are the ones that bring the baby out and in bodies that orgasm. Those are the hormones that bring on that orgasm, if you can let go and allow in that space.
Yeah, so well said. And I think it is our dilemma that all over the world, right? Hospital birth is where the majority of people give birth. And just adding to that doula role in comfortable space is what I call the birth ambiance, right? Because a lot of times people think, okay, I'm stuck with this hospital room, but it's a sick room. And when you go into a space that was designed for sick people, a lot of us just take on that role as patient, as, we can't do it, or we need support. Or I always just say we're literally put down, both figuratively and emotionally. The center of the room is a bed. And, you know, so often in labor, the rooms I see around the world in hospitals that are doing leading work, and even in the US, a few of our hospitals, we finally have got the bed to the corner, or it's a futon on the floor. And when you open the space up to creative space, it's amazing how people literally move and behave in different ways. But for all those listening, right, they can take this back. You know, just bringing in your own belongings, creating an environment that feels safe to you, that is sexy. You know, that we always love that saying, you know, the right place to give birth is often the right place to make love and bring your sacred sexuality in. And so I love to ask people that question, you know, what would you need to change that hospital space to safe and sexy?
Exactly. And I live here up north where we have winter 6 months of the year and people wear heavy coats.
Wow.
So one of the things I do is we all take off our coats and I open them up. So all that body odor gets into the labor room space, because the brain recognizes that, and that helps the brain feel safe. So I try to, and I think that's people who enjoy aromatherapy, you know, putting it on the cotton ball and the styrofoam cup. So if the laboring person gets tired of the smell, it's very easy to dispose of. I'm not a fan of diffusers for that reason, because they affect everybody. But in the room and get into the system. But thinking about how can I help this brain to familiarize itself with the space? So I tell people to take the hospital tour at least twice, because you take it twice. The third time you return to that space, your brain has a feeling of relaxation. It's the rule of 3. So the third time you experience anything, and it doesn't matter if it's over 3 weeks or you go on vacation somewhere once a year, the third year you return, it feels familiar. Or it can be in 15 minutes if you're interviewing a child. So for something, and you leave the room and come back, and you leave the room and come back in that 15-minute time span. The third time, the child will experience you as being very familiar and safe, and you can proceed on with the interview. So I use the rule of 3 all the time. It just happens to be one of the ways our brains work in achieving familiarity. So sense of smell, sight, being familiar with the space, the rule of 3. What else do I do? You know, I have all these tricks to help people feel comfortable and safe as far as they can in that environment.
Fantastic. I like the rule of 3. That's fantastic. I've never done that, but it makes sense, right? Take that tour. And even if it's a birth center, right? If it's anywhere other than your own home, to really make sure you feel safe and comfortable. And I would think too, then you're more aware of other things you might want to bring to supplement the space, to make it more your own, to rearrange it in that way. Well,
music is good. I
want to ask you this. How do our sexual beliefs, our perceptions, and our trauma get in the way? Because I think, you know, we've kind of talked about the team and talked about the environment, but I think one of the biggest barriers is really ourselves and our own connection to sexuality, especially if we're coming from a place of trauma.
Some people have a very diffuse sense of what sexuality and pleasure is, and they find it all over. Women, especially with what turns women on, women are experienced, and this has been done with vaginal plethysmograph, which means that it's put inside the vagina like a tampon, and measured, did the vagina get moist? Was there more blood flow? So signs of physiological arousal. And this is done by Meredith Chivers about 10, 15 years ago, this particular study about what really excites women and what really excites men. So, and women are turned on by landscapes. So by looking at pretty views. So what that means is that there's an oxytocin flow. There is a pleasure trigger when you are looking at something that you consider beautiful. Men don't have this, okay? Women are not excited by watching men work out or to do physical activity. That's not a typical thing that arouses women. Men love to watch women exercise. They find that very erotic and very exciting. So women are turned on by watching animals mate or by watching them engage in courtship rituals. Men could care less about animals. So it's very interesting. So women, what excites women, and I want to say this, is that what is an oxytocin trigger for women is more diffuse, and we tend to find our brains are primed for us to find pleasure in a variety of different ways, where with men's brains, it tends to be more overtly sexual or physical. So no matter what their orientation is, whether they are gay or straight or heterosexual or binary or whatever, that did not matter. But so that gives us some information about perception and beliefs. It's like, and I think when you come back to sexual beliefs, is who is sex for? Who gets to have sex, and why do you have sex? What is it about? What can be sexual and what can? What activities are all right with only your primary mate, and what activities are all right with other people who you have loving feelings for or caring feelings about? So, and those limits are often about, well, what in a relationship, those boundaries are set by what helps somebody else to feel safe. And that varies a great deal. But for people who have beliefs, no matter where they come from, about that pleasure is only in a particular context, and sex is only for procreation, or it's only for when I'm feeling this particular way towards you, like not just friendship, or that I need to be seen, I need to have emotional intimacy first, we need to have a conversation so I know what's going on in your internal world, you know what's going on in my internal world, and now that we have this emotional intimacy, now I can be sexual. And other people don't need that at all. They're like, oh, I haven't seen you for 2 weeks, and then they're happy to have intercourse, and and then they proceed on from there. So when it comes to sexual beliefs and perceptions, I think looking at, how do I feel about pleasure? Does pleasure become accompanied with guilt in some contexts? And is that all right with me? Or do I want to work with that some more? And sometimes if you were scolded as a child for experiencing pleasure, for enjoying something, climbing trees, or you wanted a second mug of hot chocolate, and it was like, oh, you don't do that. It's like, we don't do that. Or scolded for masturbating in public when you were 2 or 3 years old, which is what everybody does. Little girls like to hump stuffed animals. They do that. And so we just say, were you shamed for that activity? Or were you told, oh, we just do that in private. If you want to do that, you need to go in your own room. We don't do that in front of other people. So what kind of messages did you get about pleasuring your own body? So I think people definitely bring that in, and their relationship experience to it. And then trauma. I think working with trauma, oftentimes people become aware of how their trauma history is affecting them only through the labor. And that's, I think, another thing that an experienced doula can do, is to center you in the experience. I mean, if people have used disassociation as a coping mechanism, and that works for them, we don't want to bring them back into the body if that's not good for them. So that's another way that it's helpful to have a prenatal relationship and understand that. And depending upon where people are at with their trauma, and how familiar they are in working with their brain when their traumatic experience gets triggered. I think that people have different levels of awareness about what they need and what works for them to bring them back. Because what's happened when your traumatic experience gets triggered is like your defense system goes online. Your attachment system, which is willing to feel vulnerability and safety, in a sense of safety, and release oxytocin, that says, whoops, we can't do that anymore because something happened, my amygdala sensed threat, it sent out adrenal hormones, and now it's telling me I need to be aware of my environment and I need to see what's going on. Is there a threat here? So that brings down oxytocin. So, but if that happens during the labor, then what that person needs is reassurance. Was that trigger from a past experience? Because the hippocampus is working overtime during labor in terms of retrieving memories and rewriting memories. So, which is why birth memories are remembered, your whole life. I think maybe 10 to 20% of the experience is gone 40 years later. I mean, it's something like they did an interview with people in their 80s who had given birth 40, 50 years before, and their amount of recall was incredible. So every study of birth memories shows that birth memories last, and positive memories are more positive, and negative memories are more negative. And when memories that are negative get triggered during labor, your support team has to work harder to help you release those and to see, okay, is that a valid threat right now? Is that a valid concern right now? And those are cerebral cortex activities, but sometimes you have to do that business in order to get back into your limbic system and allow yourself to feel safe again and allow those, the oxytocin is so potent that if you can address the concerns and the fears of someone who's been triggered, their trauma's been triggered well, you can help that oxytocin system to become more dominant again, and the spontaneous labor will go. Sometimes they are going to need some PIT, all right, in order to do that, because the trauma trigger has been so potent, and they're just like, I'm not feeling safe anymore. And I want to give people permission to have that experience, because I think that's another thing about, we talk about sexy birth. What I mean is, being present with yourself in your experience and being with your body and in alignment with your body and your laboring brain as much as you can be. But it also means you have to be compassionate and forgiving towards yourself for the experience that you're having, because it's a culmination of like everything you've experienced in your life up to this point comes to play during labor. And whether those are feelings of pleasure in the body or ones that are more like, my body has not been a safe place for me to be. And can you rewrite that during labor? Yeah, you can sometimes. If you get that really good support, you can. And I think that's one of the potentialities of human labor and birth that we have not tapped into, because our whole system evolved during a very unique 30-year period in history. Up to that point, up to the 1930s, women were not given a lot of medication during labor. And so mothers and babies were together. And then we had this 30-year period where women were heavily medicated. And so the evolution of two professions happened. Pediatrics and neonatology to take care of the baby, and obstetrics to take care of the person who's given birth. And so we developed this system of separation. And then once in the 1960s, people said, I don't want that anymore. I don't want to be medicated like that. What we've been doing for the last 50 years is trying to repair something, trying to bring this natural paradigm that existed for thousands of years back together again. If those professions had not evolved in that period of time, we wouldn't have to do the work that we're doing now to make mother-baby be seen as a dyad. And we're using all of our science to say that, yeah, the way we evolved to be together is actually optimal and optimizes human potential in everybody. But we have to be offensive almost, because medicine doesn't see it that way, because that's not the way their professions evolve. So waking up staff, I think, to work with the laboring brain, you would think they would know this stuff. I just went through, I did a workshop last week, and I did one a year ago, and of the 70 nurses who I said, what are the 4 purposes of oxytocin? And then I gave them 3 minutes to come up with them. I let them discuss it in small groups. No group could come up with all 4 purposes of oxytocin. And I bet you, Debra, everybody who's listening to this today, if we gave them a piece of scratch paper in 30 seconds, they'd be able to write them all down.
Okay, so why don't we ask them? Everybody here, write it down. I'd love to know that. We'll see who's got it here.
Yeah, put it in the comments. Why don't you do that?
Those of you that can get into that chat box.
Yeah, what do you know or think you might know about the purposes of oxytocin? So my takeaway there is that nurses and physicians did not learn how to work with the laboring brain. And a lot of the general public assumes that they understand this, and they understand oxytocin flow, and they understand about protecting spontaneous labor. But that's not their orientation. That's not what they know. And so there's a huge schism between what people expect to occur in the hospital and what really occurs. So and I also think part of having a sexy birth is being seen as an individual. And the system isn't set up to see you as an individual. They're there to process you having your baby and getting your baby out. They're there to process the labor. They're not there to treat the individual. They're there to get the baby out. So.
Yeah. So that makes me think, Amy, you know, one of the things I like to say is I think we finally are getting more whole. And so often we're talking about body, mind, spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you hear body, mind, spirit. And even in preparation for birth, I think we went through a long time where it was all just body, right?
Yeah.
And now we're finally realizing that the body works with a mind and a spirit and the physiology and the hormones. But what we're talking about today is bringing in sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So for those that are listening that are pregnant, can you give some tips? How could someone who's expecting kind of integrate this knowledge that you gave today to kind of bring body, mind, spirit, physiology, sexuality together in their preparation?
I think that if you are in a relationship with a partner, if you have a mate, is to focus on the sensuality and feeling good in your body, being touched, and being loving, doing eye contact, laughing together, recalling romantic moments of the past, and feeling the pleasure of that, the pleasure of just holding one another and being present in that moment, not thinking about what's on my phone, did I do this? It's like, I'm gonna be here 100%, okay? I'm gonna be 100% feeling what I feel in my body right now while my partner hugs me, or while my partner touches me and strokes me in a way that I find pleasurable. I'm just gonna be present with that, and I'm going to take that in. Because as a sex educator married to a sex therapist, I find that that's what a lot of people are not doing. They are not present in their bodies 100%, and they don't allow themselves to just feel pleasure for 10 or 15 minutes at a time without doing anything about it, or without feeling guilty, or that they ought to be doing something different, or this is, and just paying attention. What comes up for me when I just allow myself to feel good, and to feel good in my body? Or for us, the reason why you got into a loving relationship with a partner or partners was for pleasure. That's why Masters and Johnson called their book about marriage The Pleasure Bond. Because that's what it's about. That's why we're in these relationships. And then we get all caught up in the minutiae of daily life and paying bills and organizing and structure, that we tend to forget that you have to nurture the pleasure. And so I would say that for anybody starting out wherever you are right now, and if you are not in a partner relationship, still, what things bring you pleasure in your life? Whether it's sexual or not sexual, and to spend time with that, and to realize that the expansion of what you find pleasurable is going to be different for men and women, because men and women, our research is showing us, are really different. We need different medicines. We need different medications. We need different therapies. We need different approaches, So I think one of the things of the last 10 years has really been acknowledging that men and women's needs are different, and that's okay. You and I parented when there were books on non-sexist child rearing. That there was a way that we could create boys and girls to be very, very similar to one another. We didn't have to have these differences. And the truth of the matter is that we are very different, and we have different needs and different perceptions. And we need to we're in a process right now of breaking down old systems and creating new ones. I mean, that's what the doula arose from a gap in the system. Once people started to wake up and being aware in labor, they're like, I need more help than my husband can give. I want to bring my childbirth educator with me. And so that's the whole rise of doulas, was because there was space in the system and it was needed. If we would have had a different system, we might have evolved differently. So with that doula role, but there's nobody else who does what a doula does. And if you don't have somebody fulfilling that role, then those needs don't get met, really. So yeah, so assessing the needs of yourself and your partner, and making sure your partner's got, for your partner to feel pleasure and a sense of ease during your birth, they need to have support. And what does that look like? Ideal partner support. I have a question. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to expect your questions to be answered. The doula's there. You can ask a question whenever you want, because men feel like they lose status if they're asking a nurse or a doctor. This is something that's revealed in the research. So, and then they need to be able to come and go with the labor support. We have to start thinking that there's a difference between being engaged with the labor support and being engaged with the birth. You can have a partner who's 100% engaged with the birth, but they don't do a lot of labor support. You know, they are kind, they are caring, they are loving, they are 100% present, but they're not putting their hands on you. You know, it's like, because that freaks them out. It's not their thing. Maybe there's they feel that you need to be around people who are similar to you, of your own gender, your own religious belief or whatever, because sometimes that comes into play in relationships. Yeah. And they also need to be able to come and go, so as they need to. And when they have that level of support, they process the experience very, very differently. And this is cross-cultural research that comes from many different countries that all says the same thing about men needing support in the system to optimize their outcomes as fathers and to help them deal with the distress of seeing the labor. A lot of times, our research says that men think epidurals are going to solve the problem. The problem being the labor, you know, and it's really hard for me to watch you in labor. And then once the partner gets the epidural, they don't like what happens. They're like, well, that was a bum decision, you know, but it was the only decision that they were offered to address what they thought was a problem. So if that's all you've got, you not to say, well, would you like an epidural? Would you like a doula? You know, it's like the doula is cheaper.
And I would say a doula, but I also would add, one of the things we're hearing from people all over the world too, as far as honoring sexuality, is to say oxytocin's a pain reliever, right?
Yes.
And I know we have a lot of partners of all, you know, both genders that watch Orgasmic Birth, our film, and come away and say, like, I didn't know, like, I could just do the things I do in general, like you said, kissing, eye contact, touching. But we're getting a lot of people, and we had a private comment on here about sex toys and masturbation and ways that either individually or with partners can be engaged in bringing enhanced sexual pleasure into birth. And I'm even having people doing that within hospital settings, where the doula might be the one at the door creating privacy and saying, don't anybody enter for the next 20 minutes. They're, you know, enjoying some intimate space. So how does that kind of play into people? I mean, how do you feel about saying to people, I think in my childbirth class, I talk about vibrators now and masturbation and all the ways that we might enjoy sexuality privately, and that we shouldn't disconnect that from birth.
Mm-hmm. Debbie Herbenek of the Kinsey Institute has done 2 really large-scale studies about the use of sex toys. And from 2008 to 2017, we saw, I think, a 45% increase in the use of sexual toys and vibrators. So yes, and so there, it's just, well, it's much more accessible. There's a lot of reasons, but those are not relevant to our discussion. I think the thing you have to make sure about is that it's not too noisy, because otherwise the baby listens to the noise of your vibrator, and then after they're born, they don't like vacuum cleaners. So they don't like that particular sound. So I think that you have to think ahead about, realize that the baby's brain is creating memories, at the same time. So I think the noise factor is one that we don't realize that, oh, somebody else is paying attention to this too. And that was kind of a funny thing that an anecdotal thing that I heard from a couple of different people. So
But there's some good silent ones now.
Yes, yeah, there are lots of good. Yes, I know. Since I go to conferences, I get free ones all the time. And I give them away to people. So I guess, yeah, I don't see it as being a problem or anything. It's just another expanded area of pleasure. I think the thing I want to get away from is this feeling of pressure that you have to have something that, that your birth experience isn't valid unless it was sexual or unless it was pleasurable. Because people have asked me, did you have a pleasurable birth? And I said, well, it didn't hurt. I had a couple births that didn't hurt and at all. But would I say that, and like my last one, I spent by myself, and I spent the whole thing by myself. And would I say that was pleasurable? Well, it wasn't painful, and I felt a sense of confidence and well-being and presence with myself and connection to a force that was deeper than myself. And there were moments when I felt like time stopped and I could just really be with that. Was that sexual? Was that pleasurable? I would not have chosen those words at that time to describe that experience, but was it fulfilling? Was it confident? Was it good? Was it positive? Was it loving? Was it sensual? Was it complete? Was I 100% present with it? Oh, for damn sure. Yeah. So I think that, I think that's one of the things I want to say here at the end is that we want people to be in alignment and present with their bodies and with the experience that they're having and the potentiality that birth has. And that when you're looking back at your birth, that I love the metaphor, and I don't know if it came from Pam England or Diane Wapio, I think her last name is Madrona, but Madrona birth, where they talk about labor and birth being your own personal myth or your own personal story, the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell said. And you can look back at your birth story and say, well, who was I? How did I deal with authority? How did I deal with adversity? How did I allow myself to feel my birth? How did I interact with my mate or my partners? How did I accept comfort? How did I, all of those answers are there for you in that story because it is so influential and it is so powerful. I mean, our birth stories, our research tells us that our birth stories help us to define our own sense of value and self-worth and our agency as a parent. And that's why to me birth is so, so, so important and why I feel like we're missing the mark. So because it has the potential to be a powerful, motivating, life-changing, in touch with yourself experience. And for those people who want that. Other people, it's what I have to do to have a child. I just have to get through this and then I get the baby and that's what I really want. And there's room for everybody in that paradigm and everybody deserves support. So it's like coming at it when you're trying to hold the container for everyone to have this possibility, realizing that the variety of what they want is very different. But the potential for pleasure and for life-changing and for it to bring your partner together when you have support. And I think that right now that especially comes from a doula or someone else in your life who, because you may have a third in your relationship or a very good friend who can also function in that way. So I don't want to make it exclusive. You have to have a doula because it's not the reality for everyone. So I want to hold that container. I do. And I feel like I took a stand for that back when I started doing birth work and being more public about it. Was like, I want that to be possible for everyone.
Yes.
Including
well said.
More adversity. Yeah. And some people have more barriers in getting that.
Right.
You know?
Well, I think a perfect way to kind of end, because I couldn't agree more. And for those that are with us, stay with us because we'll open up to a live Q&A. So in a second, but Amy, before we do, I'd love for you to just share your website. How can people reach you? Social media, how can we follow you and get more?
Okay. Well, first I want to answer those questions about oxytocin. So we've got sexual arousal and orgasm. We've got labor contractions. We've got the milk letdown reflex. And it's also what we call the friendliness hormone, or the hormone of social interaction. When we make eye contact and shake someone's hand, we're raising their oxytocin level. Whenever we're walking by someone in a hallway and you look at them for 1, 2, if you look at them for that 3rd second, you have to acknowledge their humanity. So that's because we've looked at each other, we've given each other enough eye contact. 1, 2, get to that 3rd second, it's like poof, there's that hit of oxytocin. We don't always want that. So oxytocin has all those purposes. So I want to get that now. And your last question was, oh, I forgot it in terms of that. I was looking at the comments. So,
yeah. Well, and we'll get to more of the comments in a second because I want to address them. But for everyone, I'd like for them to know how can they get in touch with you.
That's right. About me, no matter what I forgot.
Media. And we're even having a question about links on how porn affects relationships. So people want to know, how do they find you?
My website is amygilliland.com. I have a member section where you can download all of my research papers, and that enables me to keep to honor copyright restrictions, because then if I have your email address, I can say, oh, well, I can look at these are the people that downloaded those PDFs. If I just put them up on my website and anybody can download them and I'm not keeping track, that's a copyright violation. So that's how I can put those journal articles up. As you said, I have my book, The Heart of the Doula, Essentials for Practice in Life, and that's based on my research. I've interviewed 60 doulas now and 30 parents. So I reopened my interviews. And so I have a longitudinal look. So I first started interviewing doulas in 2002. I have an unpublished research project on hospital-based doulas, and it's only unpublished because life events happened. Like my mother got terminally ill, and so then I had to move, and then it's like publishing is a big project. So let's see. My workshop is with Martha Kepi, K-A-U-P-P-I. She's the one who I've done the pornography and relationships. And Martha used to be a midwife. When I first met her, she was a licensed professional midwife in the state of Washington who moved to Wisconsin. That was back in the early 90s. So we actually went to births together. And then she ended up working at a sexuality resource store, and then went back to school and became a sex therapist. And so now she's done that successfully, and now she's doing online training. So my pornography and relations section is a part of her coursework. Yeah, as a part of her coursework. So you can buy that through Martha Kepi. I also have I have another about men and birth and sex, and that one hasn't been released yet, that podcast that I did a couple of months ago. So yeah, and then I will have my own, later on this year, I'll have my fathers and birth up on Thinkific. So I'll have that available. It's an online course. So I'm doing a lot of expansion this year in terms of making more material available to people. I have 2 other books I've written chapters in, Doulas and Intimate Labor and Round the Circle. Those are both available on Amazon. And the Round the Circle talks about attending the births of friends, which is not always rosy. My research said that's not, if you want to preserve the relationship, hire a doula for your friend. Basically, that's the quick and dirty conclusion. If you want to know more of what the research said, buy Julie's book, Round the Circle. And Doulas and Intimate Labor, that is an academic book, and my chapter in there is on my research on how doulas help people transform their sense of identity about who they are as people, or how doulas help people to transform their grief, because everybody comes to birth and having another child with also an experience of loss, because you're losing who you were, you're losing your former life, you're losing your earlier priorities, and people don't tend to think about it like that. But doulas, that's another skill that we have, is we help people become who they're going to be next, or who they have to be next in order to become a parent to that child. So that's what that chapter is about. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Amy.
Sure.
Always such a pleasure. But I want to invite those that are still with us, if you want to open up a mic or a video, if you have a comment or a question for Amy, feel free right now to kind of open it up. I think while you're doing that, there was a question going back from Denise that asked, in menopause, where is oxytocin? That's kind of a little off our webinar topic, but I thought, let's ask.
I think oxytocin levels do not change. And I think that when your estrogen level goes down and you're experiencing, how you experience being in your body is different. How you experience the emotions that you have is different. And transcending that period of hormonal flux and change. Some of us can do that. Our bodies allow us to do that without supports, without needing supplemental hormones. And some bodies are totally dysregulated. And so the women choose to take artificial hormones. And both of those are viable, because we all have different kinds of bodies that have experienced different levels of toxicity, different levels of trauma. Trauma definitely affects how your adrenals and your endocrine system work. Oxytocin is not really affected by menopause, but I think you need to look for different sources of pleasure. I think the life changes that are often occurring in the people between 45 and 60 about children leaving home, reestablishing career, figuring out your identity. If a lot of your identity has been based on a youthful appearance and now that is shifting and changing, well, who am I now? And so incorporating experiences of pleasure and oxytocin and a variety of those, I think, is important. And for my work as a sex educator working with adults, I think that expanding your perspective on what is sexuality and what is pleasurable, and it's normal for your sexual response to change as a part of menopause, to have orgasm be easier, orgasm be more elusive. Any kind of change is normal. So the change is normal. What that change is may be more disrupted for you. So, but in that way, expanding pleasure, I think, is really, really key. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And I see we have someone on, Denise, it's you. I was like, I see Denise. I'm like, who is that? Please chime in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. This was really informative. I've been following Amy for a long time, and Amy was so gracious to offer me an advanced review copy of her book for my feedback. And I just want to publicly say that I could not do that at the time for Amy, because my mother was also terminally ill and passed away. But Amy's work is just phenomenal. I've been following her for a long time, and I'm just so thrilled at what she's saying here today. And even though what I found was really profound with this discussion today, that the subject of race was not brought up, but I can see on so many tidbits of what Amy said, how I can apply this to the Black birth. So that's really important to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I work really hard as a doula trainer and to be a person, to be a bridge in my community. Sometimes it's not always easy to traverse that territory by being somebody who white people trust and will say, and I have learned to frame things instead of terms of race, in terms of culture, because that for nurses, that tends to turn down the volume on the emotionality, and they're like, oh, we're supposed to help people cross-culturally. And by using that as a frame, I've really been able to help them access why your clients, your patients of color should not trust you, why they do not trust you automatically, and why that is a erroneous expectation. That you feel that they should trust you automatically like white people do. It's a different culture, and there's very, very good reason. And I just completed a whole series with one of our larger hospitals last week, a mandatory series where I brought up these are the concerns, thoughts, and feelings that your patients of color are having that you don't know about, and that you are missing the boat since you don't know this. And so they seem to really take in that message. I wish I had more time in order to just, instead of throwing information at them, to work on the behavior change, but that will come. That's what I said. As I said, this is the step. The information is the first step. And then you're going to say, well, how do I achieve this thing? Because now I want to. Yay, bring me back. Then we'll work on that part. But that's always in the back of my mind is this says, who are you centering in this conversation and who's being left out? And so this is one of my reminders, is that without just having to mention it, is like, yeah, so that was on my mind. So I'm glad you picked up on that, Denise. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that feedback.
Thank you so much. It's just, it was very refreshing, and I was able to sit here and really listen to what you had to say. And I could definitely just close my eyes and just know which of my clients I could actually apply this to. And for the fathers, that great discussion you said about fathers, because the poor fathers are so stressed out and feeling so obligated to cut the cord, to help her push, and that's a lot of pressure. I think that could be trauma inducing also. So I really applaud, what you were saying here today, Amy. It was always great to spend time with you and Debra. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you so much for being here and adding your words and wisdom to Denise. Thank you. And we have a question. I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to also unmute or not, but she said, thanks, this was great. How can you create safety and pleasure if you have to be induced with Pitocin? If and when does natural oxytocin get involved?
I think that with a Pitocin induction, you can definitely help to create an atmosphere that's more calm, more pleasure-centered, and realizing that early labor has its place as well. So doing the things that help spontaneous oxytocin to occur and to be released. But here's the key thing with a Pitocin induction, is the success of a Pitocin induction is how many receptors are there on that uterus for that Pitocin. Because if you don't have enough receptors, it doesn't matter how much Pitocin you pump in there, because there's no place for it to be received. There's no place for it to be received. So you can think about that in terms of lots of other ways. But so if the receptors have evolved and they are accepting the Pitocin and they are allowing contractions to occur, doing the things that also help to stimulate natural oxytocin simultaneously are also good. Nipple stimulation, genital stimulation, being held, cuddling, torso to torso touch, laughter, music that the other person finds soothing. In my doula trainings, we go through 18 different ways to stimulate oxytocin, because that, my goal is for doulas to understand is that your role is to protect the laboring brain. So, and part of protecting that laboring brain is keeping that spontaneous oxytocin stimulated. So we go through that, pretty thoroughly in those 3 days. But those are all things that you can do during a Pitocin induction. Massaging hands and feet, getting people to relax, having them tell the story about their honeymoon, just trying to help create that bubble. Because the Pitocin in here, or in here, that's where the bubble starts. So, and then you're gonna expand it around the body, and then expand it around the partner or the other supportive people there. So it's starting here, but you're growing with it here, and allowing the body to do what it needs to do. And here's the thing: if we had a better way of communicating with the laboring brain, we would never need to do it cervically. Because the thing is, we haven't found an effective way to get the brain to communicate that information to us. But that brain knows. That brain knows exactly what's happening with that sphincter. And we just haven't gotten to the place where we can say, okay, okay, Jordan, where are you at? So when Jordan says, oh, I'm 5. It's like, okay, great. we haven't figured out how to get that brain to communicate that information to us. And if we did, we'd never have to do this. And then we never have to scare that sphincter. Because that's the other thing that we do when we do those things. No other human interaction do you meet a stranger and they put their fingers inside your genitals. It is the weirdest thing. If you're explaining this to a Martian, it's like, wait a minute. So you want spontaneous labor to occur, and then you do all these things that counteract it? And ones that are trauma triggers? It's like, why don't you just figure out some better way to communicate with the brain? So when I put things like that to medical people, they're kind of like, you know, like the whole architecture, the whole architecture of your hospital is based on Pitocin.
Right.
You know, it's like they kind of go, oh, if you didn't have that, you would do whatever you could to protect that fragile labor, that spontaneous oxytocin. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, Amy. And I know we could go on forever, so maybe we need to do a part 2 going forward. And we're getting some great thank yous here. So we really appreciate all of you joining us today. As I said, you will get the recording to this in a few days to a week, as Megan, our pleasure coordinator, can help. We hope that you'll share with us, you know, if you think about what were your favorite takeaways, we'd love to hear. You can shoot us emails. The email that you signed up for, our orgasmic birth list, will be the one where a general will come out for further discussion. And Amy, I really can't thank you enough. You always have so much wisdom that just kind of lights my mind on fire too. And I'd love to do something in the future. So we have to keep this series going maybe, and every quarter get a discussion going, because I just truly love getting a chance to tap into all that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I so love talking with you because you're so receptive. You understand what I'm trying to communicate and help me do that better. So it's so wonderful to talk with you.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, have a great day. And everyone that's joining us, we have from Finland and Trinidad and the US and other places. We look forward to staying in touch. And we're so glad that this crosses all cultures and all around the world. I think these topics need to be talked about everywhere and then made personal to your clients or yourself. So thank you all for taking the time with us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.